Tonight, every sip of water you take may echo a swallow taken 5,000 years ago. The same wandering molecules, the same patient Nile, the same quiet rituals of washing and blessing, repeating, repeating, like a river that refuses to forget. Imagine this. The breath you exhale in a 21st century bedroom once drifted through the lungs of a boatman guiding a reed skiff past papyrus and watchful crocodiles. Empires fell, languages changed, but the water kept arriving, carrying memory the way a body carries a heartbeat. You are lying down now, but your night begins where a cat could be a goddess and a name could be carved into eternity. You live in a world of buzzing phones and electric light. They lived by oil flame and constellations scratched on the mind. Yet the same small hopes hum in the dark. Warmth, safety, someone watching over the fragile place between waking and sleep. In Egypt, they believed that after death, a heart was weighed against a feather, and that truth itself had wings. Imagine a life judged not by noise or wealth, but by how lightly the heart could rest. Tonight, I will open a quiet door for you. We will uncover 50 hidden things the Nile keeps in its slow memory, rites behind temple curtains, the perfume of resin, beer, and bread at dawn, the whisper of priests and midwives, letters scratched on broken pottery, eyes painted toward the glare, amulets tied against fear, cats mourned with real tears, and the careful instructions that taught the dead to speak again. You will hear how faith and daily bread braided into one river-long story where nothing truly ended, only changed its form and flowed on. Close your eyes. Feel the cool stone beneath your bare feet, the soft grit along the edge. Far off, water hushes against a bank. Somewhere, a small bell flickers in the wind. Your breath eases. Your shoulders loosen. The night turns silky and still. Step forward, gently. The past is waiting, and it knows your name. Close your eyes and let the first light arrive. It comes the way it always has along this river, quietly, like a silk ribbon drawn through a ring. The horizon is a pale seam, then a wash of honey, then a slow bloom of gold that begins to finger across the water. Night thins. Palms and reed beds lean out of the dark. The Nile inhales, exhales, and the skin of the current loosens into tiny scales that catch the day. The air is cool at first touch, fresh, damp, carrying a sweet hint of lotus, as if someone has just broken open a petal and let its milk drift free. There is resin in the air, too, the faint, warm smoke of temple offerings, frankincense and myrrh, a whisper of pine from coniferous resin, the memory of wine and honey folded into the burn. The scent is both clean and ancient, like pages pressed with flowers. With every breath you take, the edges inside you turn rounder, smoother. Listen, a shiver of metal teeth. The sistrum quivers from a courtyard where women are waking the morning. The sound trembles and hangs like sunlight shaken from a bracelet. Somewhere deeper, a low drum answers, soft and steady, the heartbeat of a priest marking time before the chant. Birds lift their cries along the banks, herons clearing their throats, sparrows cracking open the day, and sharp as a reed pen, the harsh, almost laughing call of an ibis sketches a line across the sky. Breathe in. The warmth of the sand remembers yesterday's sun. Step with bare feet, and the grains sift and accept you, welcoming your weight, then releasing it. There is a path that winds past a garden patch where the dew still threads the leaves of onions and lettuce. A clay jar sweats on its side. When you touch it, the damp cool seeps into your palm. Your other hand finds the edge of papyrus laid to dry. The fibers rough as cat's tongue under your fingertips. The surface, a soft rasp that tugs at your skin. You press the pads of your fingers together and feel the faintest green smell. Water and stalk and summer rise into your throat. Light grows. Columns emerge from shadow. Stone trunks banded with carvings, and the first touch of the sun slides down them like warm oil. You lay your cheek against the nearest one, and it is cool, almost cold. The night still gathered there. The surface is satin smooth along one worn track, then suddenly catches. A line of hieroglyphs, a bird, a loaf, an eye cut into the face of the pillar. You find the groove with your fingertip, and it fits as if carved yesterday. Time here is a circle. It sits down beside you without hurry. You are no longer in your room. You lie on a straw-stuffed mat in a clay-walled house where the air smells of fresh bread and newly ground grain. Flour dust still floats in the slant of light. You can taste it on your tongue. Warm, nutty, the simplest possible promise. Next to the oven, an oil lamp makes a small orange lake. Its flame wavers when the door opens. Someone laughs softly. The sound as low as a scratching quail. A child pads past, and the rush mat whispers under her heels. On a hook near the door, a linen tunic breathes out the faint, clean scent of the river where it was rinsed and wrung. Outside, boats loosen their knots. A ferryman pushes away with a pole, and the hull groans. Tired wood, good wood, then glides. The river touches the boat like a cat brushing your legs. Farther up, a barge moves with bundles of papyrus, and you hear the tick-tick-tick of the reeds tapping its side. The sun has found its stride now. It lays a path across the water that looks almost like hammered gold leaf. As you watch, a fish shoulders the surface, then disappears. A small page turned and closed. The city is waking gently. Pots click, sandals skim dust. A vendor clears his throat and tests his morning call under his breath. On a terrace, someone crumbles dried mint into a cup. The bruised leaves open a bright green ribbon in the air. A woman pins a cone of perfumed resin to her hair, and as it warms, it releases sweetness. Wine and herbs and night, so slowly that time seems to slow with it. The smell visits you, then leaves, then returns, like a tide of memory. The temple doors breathe open. Shadows fold back, and the cool inside greets the heat outside, a marriage of contrasts. The floor is stone, newly damp from a libation swept across it, and your steps are careful. Heel, then toe, until your body learns the rhythm, and you float forward. The sistrum trembles again, closer now, joined by a line of voices, low and smooth, syllables carrying like oars pulling water. The drum is no longer a sound, but a feeling under your breastbone, steadying you. You pause beneath a painted lintel. Overhead, stars on a blue ceiling, summer trapped and shining. A priest carries a brazier, and the smoke rises in a straight ribbon, then bends and lightly touches your cheek. It smells of resin and sun-warmed wood and something sweet you cannot name. You let it move through you the way a breeze moves through tall grass. Outside again, the day has ripened. The palm fronds clatter like light rain. A cat walks the wall, tail like a question mark, and drops into the path without sound. It leans against your calf, silk rubbing stone, and pauses to blink at you, a slow benediction. When you kneel, its fur is warm and dusty. Under your hand, a small engine of purr begins, smoothing the last roughness from your thoughts. The market stirs, but does not shout. A thread spinner hums under her breath. A potter's wheel turns with a soft, wet whisper. Dates piled in baskets give off a caramel heat. Figs wear a bloom like breath on glass. Someone splits open a pomegranate, and the seeds glow like beads spilled on clay. Children count them, then lose track, then begin again. Counting here is a game, and also a prayer. The river keeps speaking, always the same story, always different words. You drift toward its edge and crouch, cupping water in both hands. It is cool enough to make your wrists sigh. When you lift it to your lips, a faint taste of silt and sunlight lingers. Clean, honest, old. The sun warms your shoulders. A curtain of reed casts stripes across your arms. The world is simple, warmth and shade, rough and smooth, scent and breath. Breathe in, slowly. The lotus opens. Breathe out, slowly. The smoke thins. With each breath, the day widens, and your mind loosens its grip. You are carried not forward or back, but deeper. Deeper into a present, expanded to hold both now and then. The drum fades to a distant comfort. The sistrum leaves a bright afterimage in the air. The ibis has flown, but its line remains, a pale seam on the morning sky. Stay here, on the soft edge where time is a shoreline and you are a pebble turned and turned by patient waves. Feel the sand, warm and forgiving. Feel the papyrus, firm and fibrous. Feel the column, cool and sure, a spine you can lean against. The light hums. The river answers. The city breathes. And you, gently, are breathing with it, steady as the Nile. The village wakes the way a reed unfurls, softly along a seam of light. Hepu rises before the sun has found the ridge, rubbing the sleep from his eyes with hands still scented of oil and straw. He is young for a scribe, his fingers fine-boned from years of practice, ink-stained in the places where habit meets skin. The little house he shares with his mother is cool at this hour. Clay walls breathing out the night. A rush mat quiet beneath his feet. A wooden headrest tilted on its side like a crescent moon waiting for a forehead. On a shelf, his writing kit. Wooden palette. 2 wells for red and black. A bundle of reed pens. Rests beside a jar of water that remembers the Nile. When he steps outside, the sky is a pale rind, the color the river takes just before the first heron lifts. A cat slides around his ankles, deliberate and companionable. She is smoke gray with a neat white bib and eyes the green of young papyrus. They call her Miu, which is another way of saying cat, and Hepu greets her with the same careful respect he uses for a scroll. In this house, a cat is not merely company. She is a small guardian of thresholds, a soft-bodied blessing. His mother, Meret, says that Bastet's favor lives in a purr, and Hepu has learned to believe sounds as much as words. He crosses the courtyard to wash. The water in the basin is cool, a thin shock that clears the last cloudy edges from his thoughts. Beside the basin sits a tiny jar of black powder, soot-smooth and faintly metallic. His sister, Satra, lifts it with deft fingers and holds his gaze in the low light. For the glare, she says, though she need not say it. With a reed, she draws a line along her lower lid and upper, extending it to a point that turns her quiet face into something startling, effortless, complete. The coal is made from ground galena, softened with oil. When the day brightens, it will swallow sunlight and spare her eyes the burn. Their mother insists it keeps sickness from the lids too, that it pushes away the small, stinging things no one can see. Satra blinks once, and the line holds like a vow. Your pens? Meret asks, all the while shaping dough into small loaves. The room smells of yeast and the green perfume of crushed grain. Hepu lifts his palette by its leather thong and tucks it under his arm. Today, He will work two kinds of writing: the ordinary kind that keeps life straight, rations, deliveries, the names of men who labored and the jars they carried, and the holy kind that folds breath into wood and linen. A carpenter named Nebet has asked him to paint the eyes on his mother's coffin and to add a single line of text: "May she see the day, may she be seen." A simple request, as simple as asking for shade, and as serious. The path to the workman's village threads between walls the color of bread. Hepu walks with a small basket on his hip, reeds and pigments rattling softly, his feet finding the smooth places in the dust by memory. Deir el Medina is a place of practiced hands, carvers who can draw out a feather from stone, painters who can stir lapis into daybreak, women whose fingertips measure dough and time at once. Here the tombs of kings are cut into the hills, and the men who cut them walk home with their shoulders glittered with dust as bright as the night sky. Hepu writes for them, and for the gods who read the truth that humans only copy. On the way, a neighbor calls to him from a doorway. Senefer's widow, Hetepti, stands with a jar cradled against her hip and a crease between her brows that is older than she is. Hepu knows that look. He keeps the ration lists. He has seen the column where Senefer's name used to be, how the numbers changed when the man's hands left the earth. "My barley," she says, but the word carries more freight than grain. He promises to check the board again, to write the petition that might add a measure to her share, and as he walks on, the thought lingers like a pebble in a sandal. He is a scribe, lover of measure and line. He is also a son with a mother, and a sister and a cat. Somewhere between the two, there is room for kindness. The carpenter's courtyard looks like the belly of a windless boat, still air, a bough of shade, the dry smell of shavings. Nebet is there with his brother. On a pair of stands between them rests the coffin, cedar panels, fitted in a cradle, surfaces smoothed with pumice and hand. The face is plain for now, but the lid is a field of quiet promise, a place to fix the path between worlds. Hepu greets the men and washes his hands again, as if cleanliness could be layered like music. Painting the eyes is not a task. It is a conversation. He measures with string, divides with breath, then lays down a line as thin as a whisper. Two eyes, wide and seeing, will face to the right when the coffin is set in the tomb, toward the rising sun, toward the daily ferry of light. Through them, the deceased may look out and be looked upon, may watch offerings arrive, and the world keep turning without her in it. Hepu mixes black for the pupils, white for the sclera from ground gypsum, a thin band of green malachite circling each, a memory of fields. The brush tip trembles for an instant as he lowers it, then the first curve flows and does not stutter. When he is done, the lid looks back at him with a calm that steadies his ribs. Nebet lowers his head. "She liked to watch the boats," he says, voice unexpectedly small. "Make them clear." Hepu nods and adds the line of text the family asked for, his reeds moving easily through the well-worn particles of sign. "May she see the day, may she be seen. May her name be spoken as the living walk by." He knows the power of names. He has copied them onto ostraca, broken bits of pot, so they can be practiced and remembered without expense. He has also witnessed how a name written badly can be a small injury. He will not make one today. Outside, the morning gathers heft. The river is a mirror with someone's palm pressed to it. Hepu steps away while the paint dries and sits where the light stripes the wall. He takes out a shard and writes, almost without thinking, the words he copies most. Life, stability, health. There are other things to write today too. The ration board cannot bend for every heartbreak. Yet a system that remembers only numbers forgets to be human. Last month, a jar of beer broke in the storehouse, and the tallyman blamed the boy who carried it. Hepu had seen the dry crack in the clay before the boy lifted the jar. He had stood in the doorway, the truth lodged in his throat like a fig seed. After a long breath, he walked in and wrote 2 words beside the mark: fault, jar. The boy's eyes changed shape. Something lifted, while nothing else had to. The carpenter calls him back. The air in the room is warmer now, thick with the scent of resin. Nebit's brother stirs a pot over coals, melting frankincense to a syrup that will seal the wood and sanctify it. Hepu watches the way the smoke climbs, a ribbon that writes and erases itself at once. He thinks of how many kinds of writing exist. The kind that keeps a household's memory straight, the kind that persuades gods, the kind that moves in breath and leaves no mark at all. As the men lift the lid to set it aside, Hepu notices a small flaw along the edge, a place where the joining doesn't quite kiss. He says nothing. The resin will fill it, and his job is sight, not wood. But sight is a habit. It keeps moving. On the bench near the door sits a line of tiny figures, the color of the river at noon. Ushabti, little answerers, their arms crossed over their chests, hands clasping miniature hoes and baskets. If the dead are called to work in the fields of reeds, these helpers will answer in her place. Hepu had once laughed at them when he was small, then been scolded for disrespect. Now he greets them with the same quiet he uses for cats and names. When he returns home at midday, the street is plank hot. He slips inside out of the sun, and the single room becomes a cool jar again. Meret has a pot on the fire, a stew that smells of onions and herbs, and a tray of flat loaves cools on a stand, their surfaces dotted with pricked patterns. Satra sits by the door, a strip of linen stretched between her knees, running her thumb along the warp to coax another line straight. She looks up and smiles. The kohl at the corners of her eyes has smudged into a softness that makes her seem both older and more awake. "You've been painting," she says, and touches the rim of his ear with a finger darkened by dye. Miu pads in from the corner, collects herself into a loaf of cat, and sighs. A cone of scented wax has been placed atop Maret's braided hair to melt slowly with the day, fat carrying perfume, drop by drop, until everything around them smells like calm. Hepu sits, eats bread and beer, workman's food and scribe's food and God's food, if you believe the walls, and listens to the sounds that make noon. A potter's wheel turning with a wet hush, a child counting pomegranate seeds, a distant thud of a drum marking an offering at the small temple down the alley. After they eat, Meret opens a basket and takes out a small blue disc carved with lines and curves, the eye of Wadjet, an amulet for protection. She threads it onto a string and ties it loosely around Satra's wrist. "For the rush to the well," she says, meaning the slippery bank and the slick clay, and the way a day can tilt from ordinary to sharp without warning. Then she turns to Miu, and, with the same serious hands, ties a linen strip around the cat's neck as a collar, with a bead threaded at the knot. The cat endures the ceremony with patience, tail flicking like a metronome. When Meret finishes, she kisses the top of Miu's head. "For Bastet's notice," she whispers. Afternoon slants quieter, Hepu carries his writing board to the storehouse to check the ration counts. The room is cool and smells of clay and dried grain. He copies numbers. Loaves issued, jars delivered, into the long columns that people trust more than memory. When he comes to Hetepti's line, he pauses. The column dipped when Senefer's name was erased from the opposite ledger that counts hands. Nothing is wrong exactly. But a life is a basket with many handles, and today, one more broke. He adds a note at the edge. Widow's petition. Festival allotment. A way the temple sometimes makes small charities appear, as if the gods thought of them first. He will take the petition himself, along with a clean ostracon that says, kindness honors Ma'at. He writes it smaller than the rest, a seed he can swallow himself if needed. On his way back, he stops at a small stall where a herb woman sits in shade with jars around her like a low constellation. Hepu buys a thumb of honey for a cut on his palm, and she adds 2 dried lotus petals to the wax packet for luck. He thanks her and watches as she powders a stone for another woman into eye paint the color of Green River. For brightness, the woman says. The herb woman nods. And for health. Truth, here, walks with beauty without elbowing it aside. At dusk, the carpenter's family calls for Hepu again. The coffin is ready for the brief ritual that will send it into the night. By the time he arrives, the air has cooled, and the courtyard shows that quiet a place holds when it has chosen to listen. Women stand with hands lifted to their hair, voices rising and falling in waves. Praise, grief, a way of making absence less empty. A priest, braided beard laying neat against his chest, holds a small blade and touches it to the mouth of the mask on the coffin lid. This is the opening of the mouth, a gesture to unseal senses, to let the dead breathe, see, speak, eat, drink in the other world. Hepu watches the blade's tip flash and dim, flash and dim. He remembers being a boy, and his father putting a finger to his lips when a procession passed, and how that single press taught him the size of silence. Afterward, when the courtyard loosens, Hepu steps close to the lid and addresses the eyes he painted. He does not speak aloud. Words do a great deal of walking without leaving footprints. His fingertips rest lightly on the wood. May you see the day. May you be seen. May your son sleep when he is tired, and wake when he is ready. May grief be a river that feeds him, not a sea that swallows. He returns home in moonlight. The door is propped with a smooth stone. Inside, the lamp throws a small, trembling triangle on the wall, and Miu lies curved within it, an animal of light and comfort. Merit sits near her, working a loose thread back into a collar. She has been slow today, she says, patting the cat's flank. Hepu kneels and lets his palm rest over the small river of Miu's ribs. They rise and fall like a chant. He remembers the festival of Bastet last year, how women poured out of the town with sistrums in their hands and laughter that ran like sandals over stone, how the barks glittered and the air became thick with song. He cannot imagine their house without the light that walks on soft feet. In the days that follow, he returns to his ordinary miracles. He writes names and dates. He draws a fish when the word for fish will not stick to a child's ear. He copies a hymn that has calmed more hearts than 1,000 jars of beer. He learns that if a loaf breaks wrong and the crack runs like a river on a map, the taste will be fine anyway, and that people like to talk when he holds a reed, as if writing is permission to say what they could not otherwise. He watches Satra crush more galena for her coal and teaches her a trick for keeping the line smooth when her hand trembles. Rest your elbow on the table. Breathe out. Move as if the brush is pulling you. She gets it on the second try and grins. For a moment, she is again the child who followed him around with a reed too big for her hand. Miu, meanwhile, slows as a river in drought. She still threads herself around ankles, still climbs to the warm ledge by the window. But her leaps shorten and her naps grow long. One evening, she does not rise to greet his return. Merit strokes her between the eyes, and Satra sits very straight, the way people do when they are trying to make more space inside themselves. Hepu kneels and sets his hand again on the cat's ribs. The small chant is faint. He speaks not to the room, but to memory. In this land, when a family cat dies, grief is not a small thing. Eyebrows are shaved, tears are counted. A softness is laid to rest with honors a stranger might not understand. Bastet sees, the story says, and what is seen is kept. Miu dies at home while the lamp still burns. The room collects a stillness that makes ordinary sounds. His mother's breath, a distant wheel, suddenly enormous. Merit stands, lifts her hand to her brow, and slides the length of hair there with the blade, once on each side. Satra follows, the gesture small but careful, like a word you only learn to say correctly when you need it most. Hepu, who has little hair to spare, smooths his brow with his palm and feels the tenderness of skin newly exposed to air. Then, solemnly, he ties a narrow linen strip around Miu's chest, placing a tiny blue-washed bead at the knot. He lays beside her a sliver of papyrus with a few signs. Travel gently, little one. The signs are clear. The reed did not shake. They bury her near the fig tree, where the shade is easy and the ground remembers how to be soft. Merit sprinkles natron over the linen they wrap her in, not for mummification, only for the old habit of keeping, of drying what is too wet and stinging. They place a painted shard at her head, a cat sketched there with a sure, affectionate hand. Satra sets a small dish of milk by the stone. For the journey, she says, although everyone knows the dish will be empty by morning for reasons entirely of this world. It does not matter. The gesture is the bridge people walk to meet what they cannot cross. That night, Hepu lies with his head on the curved wood of the headrest, the spine of his neck aligning with muscle, the way his father taught him when he was small. The room smells faintly of incense. Miret lit a crumb of resin for Miu. Hepu's eyes close, open, close again. He thinks of the coffin's painted eyes and the way they look, not past the living, but through them into the ordinary days that deserve to be witnessed. He thinks of coal lines drawn to ease the burn of sun and to set a boundary between the human eye and the wide world. He thinks of cats who share a house and its breath, and of the way grief makes a home both larger and quieter at once. Before sleep takes him, another thought arrives, uninvited, but calm. Tomorrow he will carry Hetepti's petition to the temple steward and add, with red ink, the ink for names, for warnings, for the words that need weight, a single sentence about Ma'at, that balance is not a scale always level, but a beam that may tilt to keep two lives on it at all. He will take a small loaf and a jar, besides, not as charity, but as the answer a person gives when they have learned to see. In the morning, the village will wake again. He will wash his face, line his eyes against the light, and greet the day with the respect he reserves for texts. He will sit with Nebet one last time before the tomb is sealed and watch as the coffin slides into its quiet corridor of stone, the eyes he painted fixed toward the dawn. He will press his palm to limestone and feel the coolness of time. He will return to his house where a knot of hair is missing from two brows, and there is a little dish near a new small stone. He will stroke the place where Miu used to stretch and feel the air remember her shape. And when he lifts his reed to write the words that people lean on, life, stability, health, he will mean them with the steadiness of someone who has learned that words are also doors. On the other side of those doors, a mother watches boats again. A cat sleeps in warm light. A widow counts loaves without fear. And a heart, when weighed, feels just a feather lighter. Night loosens its hold the way a knot relaxes under warm fingers. Villagers drift into evening as if into a known song. A circle of firelight, hands busy, voices low. Hepu sits among them, a reed pen tucked behind his ear by habit, the day's dust still clinging to his ankles. Sparks rise and vanish. Someone sets a clay pot close to the coals. Someone else turns a flat round of dough with a practiced flick that would make a scribe jealous. The air tastes of onions and yeast and the faint sweetness of dates crushed into paste. Children count stars until numbers dissolve into awe. When the talk grows quiet, the river does the speaking. It keeps the village alive the way breath keeps a body alive, without fuss, without pause. Farmers lean back on their heels, palms warm, shoulders loose, and speak of water levels the way sailors speak of wind. They know which sandbar shows its back when the flood will be generous. They know the tone of a frog chorus that means plant soon. The Nile is the long sentence everyone reads together. By day, fields have been a geometry of purpose. Raised beds drawn with a line of mud, a canal cut to carry the world's slow pulse into thirsty soil. Hepu watched a boy work the shadaf, a long pole with a bucket on one end, a weight on the other, and it looked like a bird drinking, dipping and rising, until the ditch shone and the earth darkened into promise. When the flood is distant, but its memory remains, men climb down a staircase cut into stone to read the water against a wall. A nilometer, a ruler for the breathing of a god. A high mark means bread and beer for all. A low mark means counting carefully, sharing carefully, trusting carefully. The calendar also listens to the river. 12 months of 30 days, tidy pages a scribe can lay in straight columns. Then 5 extra days placed between years like gentle steps across a gap. They call them the birthdays of gods, days outside the count, days when time feels like a guest. The year wakes when Sirius rises before dawn and the Nile swells. The first month tastes of fresh silt and green shoots. At night, people read hours by stars called deacons, small boats of light sliding up the eastern horizon one after another, telling time without a bell. A water clock in the temple drips the dark into measure. A shadow clock outside lays the sun down in lengths like ribbons cut and numbered. Time here is an agreement with sky and river, not a cage. After supper, the fire burns to a honey glow. The old men tell boat stories, shoulders swaying with the memory of oars. We sang, they say, and the tune returns, a call, a response, the boat moving in the seam between voices. A sistrum trembles softly in a woman's hand, the bronze tongues of it ringing like warm rain. Someone draws a menet necklace through their fingers for rhythm. The river is a road, and on that road, memories travel without growing thin. In the houses, sleep is clever. Roofs are flat and welcoming. On hot nights, people climb a ladder and make the sky their ceiling. Pillows are not sacks of feathers, but curved wooden headrests, cool under the skull, keeping necks aligned and elaborate braids uncrushed. The first time you try one, it feels like a question. The second time, it feels like the answer you didn't know you were seeking. Linen sheets breathe. Walls hold the night like a jar holds water. Windows are small and high, placed to invite breeze and refuse glare. In the street, a cat pads along the wall's top, pauses, and becomes part of the architecture of calm. Festivals arrive the way jasmine arrives, suddenly everywhere, then quietly remembered on wrists and hair. Bodies glow with ochre, red for vitality, yellow for sunshine, hands and faces dusted as if they had been out walking in dawn. People pin cones of perfumed resin to their wigs. The cones soften with heat and dissolve into scent, a slow blessing that keeps pace with dancing. Head is shaved under the wig, a decision made for coolness and cleanliness, not for lack. Wigs are works of daily art, plaited, curled, ribbed with beads, breathing cedar oil and frankincense. Kohl circles the eyes in black and green, not only to make faces brave, but to make pupils comfortable in a country of light. Galena and malachite lay down a line that catches sun and sends it away. Mothers say it keeps eyes well. Healers say much the same. Bread and beer move through these days like small gods in humble clothes. Work is paid in loaves and jars. Gratitude is measured in the same. The temple granary is a pulse of clay rooms where grain sleeps in dark bellies until it's called. Scribes like Hepu count it with more love than they'll admit. There are breads shaped like fish and birds, breads studded with dates or scented with coriander, breads hard as a roof tile for the road, and breads soft as a palm for the table. Beer is clouded and kind, brewed with bread, thick with life, sipped through straws to ignore the floating bits. Children's giggles navigate the straw maze. Elders' smiles remember how they did the same. Sometimes a loaf crunches in a way no bread should crunch. The quern that grinds the flour also grinds a little stone into it, and teeth pay for bread like everyone else. Healers mix honey for sore gums, lay it on wounds, praise its clean sweetness for the way it keeps rot from making a home. In the courtyard, a board is scratched with squares, a handful of pebbles arranged, a stick tossed. A game of senate glides along its path. Hands move, laughter threads, and someone whispers a wish under their breath. For senate is not merely play, but practice for journeys, a rehearsal of steps in a place where rules are the map. Children trace the serpent coils of Mehen with a fingertip and imagine the whole world as a circle you can finish with patience. Play here is a prayer that smiles. Inside, small gods keep the edges safe. A squat, lion-faced protector named Bess glares cheerfully from a painted pot, frightening woes that travel on short legs. Taweret, the hippo mother, leans forward on the wall, a knife carved into her silhouette. Do not disturb the sleeping or the birthing. On a nail, a Tayat knot of Isis hangs like a drop of blood shaped into mercy. A jed pillar stands steady on a shelf, a spine for the world. Children wear eyes on strings, little blue wadjet amulets that say, "Be seen by protection, even when you cannot see it yourself." In a corner, the house shrine collects breadcrumbs and thanks. At the river's bend, boats with new paint move like bright commas in the sentence of water. Fishermen cast nets in elegant arcs. The lines land like handwriting a teacher could praise. Harpooners stand balanced as dancers, eyes narrowed not with anger, but with listening. The papyrus marsh is a library of whispers. Papyrus stalks become boats, sandals, mats, baskets, and sheets for words. It is humble and miraculous at once. In the evening, returning boats sing again, and the song seems to help the whole remember how to be a home on moving ground. Workdays hold their own quiet surprises. At the Royal Workmen's Village, where tombs take shape inside mountain ribs, attendance is kept with care, but also with mercy. Hepu's ledgers are dotted with reasons for absence written without scorn. Ill, wife ill, brewing beer, nursing mother, bitten by a scorpion, mourning a cat. A state that can name such things can soften such things. There is a day every 10 when the tools rest and bodies remember they are not tools. On those days, men fix roofs, women barter for spices with the easy ferocity of experts, and children wear their hair in a side lock and chase a hoop as if joy itself needed encouragement. At the edge of the village, a school hums in a low room with cool floor. A boy sits with knees dusty and learns to draw the sign for heart, then truth, then binds them together the way life will bind them later, before a different teacher. Red ink for what matters most, for beginnings of names and the words that warn. Black ink for the steady road between. Teachers thwack a reed on the table when minds wander, not your fingers, your attention, and then unroll a scroll and let the old wisdoms breathe. Do not be arrogant because of your knowledge. A house of life in the temple keeps recipes for medicine and spells for backup, because this is a country that likes to double stitch. Healers lean over a woman's wrist and read a pulse like a river. They grind herbs in bowls that will later carry stew. The border between art and life is porous in a good way. Honey closes a wound. Castor oil persuades a stubborn body to change its mind. Cumin warms a cold belly. Fenugreek softens a cough. Midwives set a birthing stool ready. Whisper a prayer to Tauret and tie a charm around the mother's wrist that says open but gently. A curious test with barley and emmer may tell whether a belly holds a daughter or a son by which grain wakes first. If both sprout, the house laughs and doubles its plans. These things are not magic and not science by your clock. They are attention. Merchants pass like traveling punctuation. Their donkeys carry news as much as goods. Copper from Sinai with stories of red mountains, resin and ebony from a place called Punt that everyone measures with their hands because it smells larger than a map. From the south comes gold that light makes into water. From the north, glass beads that hold a piece of sky, even in shade. Faience, ground quartz baked until it remembers rivers, gleams cool as morning. Nothing here is only itself. At funerals, grief is not hidden. It's braided into duty and offered to the day. Professional mourners raise their voices in waves, wrapping sorrow around the living until it holds them up. The dead travel with instructions and company. Ushabti, packed into boxes like a small army that will answer when work is called. Jars shaped like guardians to keep organs safe. A heart left right where it belongs, because the heart speaks truth when truth is needed. A scarab of stone sits above it, carved with a gentle command. Do not rise against me when I am measured. It is not fear that builds these rituals. It is affection. At night on rooftops, after the festival deposes itself gently into memory, skin smells of resin and sun and a little dust. Wigs come off. Headrests wait. Hands wash in bowls set on stands. The water glows with a thin skin of oil, scented with marjoram or blue lotus. Linen robes are shaken and hung. Pleats pinched between fingers and coaxed back into crispness. Tomorrow, the cloth will wave like a small flag of light with every step. Laundry day threads the river's edge with laughter. Women beat linens against smooth stones. sprinkle natron into the water to convince stains to surrender, and lay cloth along reeds to invite the wind to help. A neighbor's good smell is a kind of polite conversation you carry on without speaking. Locks click softly at doorways, wooden teeth sliding into wooden gums. Keys are long and honest, more symbol than secret. A boy feels the weight of one in his hand and understands something about thresholds. Inside, the pantry is a little geography. Jars of beer stacked to the left, onions braided and hung where they make the room look like a place strong enough to survive any winter this land does not have. Garlic in ropes, perfuming the air with a promise against ache and evil spirits alike. A small jar of salt sits high like a watchman. A small jar of pepper sits lower like mischief. Women in this village read ledgers when they need to, sign their names with a mark or a memory, own a field, end a marriage that has stopped being a shelter. Not every story is gentle, but there are paths, and the paths remember feet. A wife can inherit. A sister can bring a case to a steward and expect a hearing. The world is not equal by your scales. It is balanced by theirs, which is not the same thing, which is not less. On a quiet evening, Hepu carries 2 loaves and a small jar to Hetepti, the widow with the careful hands. He brings also a sheet of words, a petition folded like a bird at rest. They sit beneath an awning, dyed the color of the river just after dusk. And she tells him how the mornings sound when you are the only person in your house who wakes. He listens in the way scribes learn to listen, without planning what to write next. When he leaves, she presses into his palm a faience bead the color of summer shade. For your sister's wrist, she says, and Hepu imagines the bead next to the tayat knot, the way 2 kinds of protection do not get in each other's way. Near the granary, a boy plays with a sealed lump of clay impressed with a little cylinder, an official mark. He rolls it in the dust and then looks up guilty when Hepu catches his eye. Not that one, Hepu says softly, and kneels to show him how the seal's picture writes authority without ink. A falcon, a name, a net of lines. The boy tries the impression in damp sand and laughs at the way power leaves a footprint. Later, he will learn to prefer reeds to seals. For now, both are spells. The temple, at dusk, sounds like a throat cleared gently. Inside, a priest moves with practiced slowness, lifting a veil, drawing back a bolt. The god is led like a precious child around his house, fed and dressed and praised. Outside, people who will never touch a statue still feel seen. A woman speaks to a stela at the wall as if it were a friend. I brought bread and beer. The prayer is simple and exact. Bread and beer are not metaphors here. They are the way the world says yes back to you. On the river, reeds whisper gossip to the wind. A barge slides by carrying jars topped with cone stoppers and tied down with fresh twist fiber rope. The cargo smells like the roof of a forest and the belly of a hive. The oarsman's song is slower now. The day has worn its edges smooth. From the bank, a herdsman answers with a whistle that floats and lands on the water like a leaf. Somewhere a dog argues with shadows and decides the shadows are right. Before sleep, houses practice their small protections. A doorway is touched 3 times with fingers dipped in water. A line of crushed malachite is laid on a shelf for the morning's eyes. A hieroglyph for life, the looped ankh, hangs where hands can find it without looking. On the floor by the cot, a headrest waits like a crescent boat. Hepu runs a thumb along its smooth span and thinks of how many things here are both tool and story. A plow that is also a poem about earth, a jug that is also a promise to return, a game that is also a map for leaving. He sits on the threshold a while and watches the night lean its shoulder against the wall. Somewhere down the lane, a woman hums to her baby. The tune is older than worry. She sings of boats and birds, of the heart that must stay light, of the feather that knows a truth quiet enough to sleep beside. She reminds the small ear against her chest that Circe, E.B., is the one part of us that speaks clearly when language is hard, and that words can be as soft as linen and still hold. Tomorrow, she will paint her eyes against the light and tie an amulet at the child's wrist. Tonight she paints the air with a lullaby. Count to 5. Someone whispers on a roof, and they mean the 5 days that live between the years, the birthdays of gods, the nights when time visits like a beloved aunt with pockets full of sweets and warnings. Count to 12, someone else says, and they mean the months that cradle the work, the festivals, the quiet. In the temple, the water clock ticks like a patient tongue. On the river, a boat slides behind a reed screen and becomes merely a footnote in mist. Hippu's mother pinches out the lamp, then lights it again from the last coal because the gesture is its own comfort. Smoke makes one brief line on the air, the closest thing a breath makes to writing, and vanishes. Heppu thinks of his ledgers, of Atepti's petition, of the careful red ink he will use. He thinks of the way a system is a kind of net, and a net should catch not only fish, but also people who would otherwise fall. He thinks of Ma'at, balance as a living bird, not a dead beam. He sets his head on the curve of wood, and the world lifts his neck as if it had been waiting to do exactly that. In the place just before sleep, facts soften into images. A calendar that keeps its neat 30 days and then steps sideways for 5 more, because life does. A perfume cone melting into hair like a comet that has decided to stay. A house god with a fierce grin guarding a cradle. A hippo mother standing watch with her knife-shaped shadow. A lock that opens to a key carved from a branch. Honest wood meeting honest wood. A loaf of bread that crunches a little but tastes of labor and ordinary holiness. A game that teaches patience and then rewards it. A jar of honey that understands both sweetness and medicine. A strip of linen that can be prayer, bandage, garment, sail. A heart that will one day be weighed and found to have loved enough to be light. Beyond the roof, the Nile turns the moon's path into a long ribbon of silver. Boats slip along it like beads on a string. Somewhere, a priest taps a drum softly, not to call anyone, only to remind the dark that it too has a rhythm. The village answers by doing nothing loudly, sleeping, breathing, being kept. And Heppu, one scribe among thousands of breath-keepers, drifts into a night where knowledge is a blanket that warms without smothering, and where the simplest luxuries, bread, beer, cool stone, kind company, are currencies that always hold their value. Civilizations are made quietly out of repeated gestures. A handful of grain measured the same way each morning. A line of coal drawn with a steady hand. A priest tapping a drum once, twice, then letting silence finish the sentence. In Egypt, such gestures were not decoration on the edge of life. They were the machinery of life. The word for that machinery was ma'at, balance, rightness, the state of things, when every strand is held just taut enough. You feel it in the way the Nile turns and returns, in the way bread and beer make a promise to every stomach, in the way a name is said out loud so it can continue to exist. Ritual here is not theater, it is infrastructure. Watch how the smallest rites scale up. A woman smudges her eyes with galena to soften the glare and soothe the lid. One body preserved for one more season of weaving, laughing. Multiply that by villages along a 1,000-mile river, and you have a population able to work, sing, and raise children in a land of blistering light. A family tacks a djed pillar to the wall to keep the house's spine straight, one home steadied against fear and accident. Multiply that by 10,000 lintels, and you have a city that sleeps. A scribe like Hipu copies rations into a ledger with care. The grain in the granary becomes meals on a table instead of mice in the straw. Scale that care into a bureaucracy, and you have a state that can survive a low flood or a clumsy official. That is how rituals form a civilization. They are habits elevated to law, kindness scaled into policy, memory stored in clay, stone, and song. The temples, too, were not only houses of gods. They were banks, granaries, pharmacies, schools, engines that transformed offerings into redistribution. An offering to a god became bread for porters, beer for stone haulers, oil for lamps, linen for the sick, wages for a carver who would in turn pay a potter, who would in turn feed a child, who would, in time, learn to read the word for life. Inside those walls, priests timed rituals to star and water clocks. Outside, farmers timed planting to the river's rise. The rhythm aligned. The private rite of washing hands before dawn matched the public purification of the temple. The festival's perfume cone melting through a day echoed the slow melt of snow in distant mountains, whose water would, months later, arrive as a gift with no wrapping. Funerary practice, so often mistaken from afar as a fixation with death, was in truth a devotion to continuity. If the afterlife demanded a body that kept its shape, then embalmers learned to dry, bind, and protect. If the heart would speak when weighed, then people lived as if someone were listening. If the ka, life force, required bread and beer, then the living formalized feeding the dead, which also fed the living who baked, brewed, carried, recorded. A coffin's painted eyes allowed the dead to see. They also taught painters to draw circles that could hold a gaze for centuries, and forced carpenters to fit lids with tenderness. An Ushabti army promised to answer labor calls. It also paid the wages of the faience maker and the glaze keeper, and preserved the shape of a hoe so perfectly that, 3,000 years later, you can almost hear the soil break. The long supply chain of belief kept crafts from dying and families from drifting. This is why belief in a second life drove the first stone mountains. The pyramid is not simply a tomb. It is a machine for resurrection, a ramp for the king to take the sun's path, a statement that the country has so much bread, labor, and harmony that it can spend vast resources to keep a single name shining. But the paradox is gentle. Pyramids did not impoverish the country so much as organize it. Corvée labor, rotations of duty when fields were underwater, gave men stable work in slack seasons. Wages of bread and beer trained a workforce. Surveying fields anew after each flood taught geometry. Hauling and setting heavy stones taught logistics and leadership. The needs of a single glorious tomb created roads, quarries, harbor basins, ramps, levers, and, perhaps most importantly, habits of coordination that would outlast stone. Stand at Giza in your mind and feel the social technology humming. Officials verify headcounts against lists. Bakers increase production and invent efficiencies. Brewers test batches for consistency. Physicians treat strains and sprains with honey and linen. Foremen log absences without cruelty. Priests recite texts at sunrise and sunset, stitching cosmology to shift work. The king's cosmic quest becomes the people's daily training and cooperation under Ma'at. The pyramid faces the cardinal points. So do the villages that learn to read the sky. The blocks fit, so do the laws. From here, the comparison with our own time is not a leap, but a step. We, too, chase continuities and make machines to carry names forward. We stack data into cloud pyramids so vast that they change landscapes. We build hospitals and research institutes like temples, places where offerings, taxes, philanthropy, time become care, knowledge, cures. We paint our eyes less with soot and more with blue light filters. We wear wristbands that are our amulets, tied not with linen, but with app settings. We write oaths and constitutions in red and black, caution, permission, and ask those documents to do what Mahat did. Balance our myriads so we can live together without breaking. We do not place hearts in stone cases with scarabs. We lay them in medical charts and personal journals and ask future readers to be kind. Even our immortality projects look familiar when you squint through Egyptian light. A philanthropist's name etched on a wing is a hedge against forgetting. So is a carefully maintained social feed, a face stored in the training set of 1,000 tiny machines. Cryonics is a modern natron. Organ donation, a new form of canopic jar with the lid wisely left open. Some of us hope for digital afterlives, others for memory kept in those we have loved well. The mode differs. The hunger to matter beyond our pulse does not. If you stretch a papyrus sheet on a table and draw a map of this hidden culture, it will not look like roads and rivers. It will look like threads, crossing and tying. Each thread a habit that holds more weight than it seems it can. To help your mind see the weave, here is a soft, numbered map. 50 small facts that together sketch the big shape behind Hepu's days. Let them arrive like lanterns across water, one by one, water and time. The Nile's flood, not a storm or a king, was the year's true clock. Stone stairways called nilometers measured water against carved marks to predict harvests. The shadoof, a pole and bucket balanced by a counterweight, let one person lift a river into a field, sip by sip. Night's hours were read by rising star groups called deacons, little boats of light. Temples kept water clocks that dripped darkness into measure when the sun could not. Shadow clocks outside turned sunlight into ribbons of time, laid end to end. The year held 360 days, then paused for 5 god days outside the count. After each flood, surveyors redrew the land with measuring cords. Taxes followed the waterline, body and health. Black coal lined eyes to cut glare and discourage infection. Beauty and medicine were the same gesture. Honey sealed wounds and sweetened offerings, antiseptic and affection at once. Castor oil lit lamps and soothed stubborn bodies. A remedy and a fuel share a bottle. A pregnancy test sprouted barley and emmer with a woman's urine. The faster seed whispered an answer. Daily washing in river water and natron kept heat and pests at bay. Cleanliness was also protection. Festival perfume cones melted through a day, scenting wigs with wine, resin, and calm. Bodies were painted with ochre during feasts, color as vitality you could wear. Linen breathed in heat and served as wrap, bandage, sail, curtain. One fiber, many lives. Home and craft sleep found necks on wooden headrests, cool and curved, preserving braids and posture. Heads were often shaved and wigs worn for hygiene, status, and style. Cedar oil kept them sweet. Faience, a man-made stone of joy, turned ground quartz into river-colored shine. Wooden locks with pins and wooden keys kept doors honest, security as joinery. Papyrus stalks became baskets, boats, sandals, and sheets for words that could travel. Quernstone grit in bread wore teeth. People paid for daily bread with tiny flecks of enamel. Beer, brewed from bread, was staple food. Straws spared lips the floating grain. The scent of blue lotus and marjoram hung in rooms where lamps rehearsed the stars. Faith and death. The heart, Enibi, was weighed against Maat's feather. It alone spoke for a life. The heart stayed in the body. A scarab above it begged the heart to rest and tell the kindest truth. Ushabti figures, little answerers, promised to work for the dead in fields of reeds. The opening of the mouth ritual, unsealed senses so the dead could breathe, speak, taste again. Coffins bore painted eyes to let the departed watch dawn and offerings arrive. Canopic jars, guarded by 4 sons of Horus, kept organs safe like guests in a quiet room. A person's name, Ren, was a life. Erasing it was a second death. Speaking it a form of food. Amulets, Ankh, Jed, Tayet, Wajet, tied protection to skin the way a sailor ties knot to rope. Work and state bread and beer were wages and welfare, the currency of ordinary holiness. Workmen's ledgers recorded absences like a neighbor. Ill, wife ill, brewing beer, mourning a cat. Corvée labor rotated farmers into state projects during flood months when fields rested. Scribes wrote in black for the everyday and read for names and warnings, a 2-color ethics. Ostraka, broken potsherds, served as scratch paper, receipts, and little letters that survived by accident. Women could own property, inherit, and seek divorce, a different kind of balance, still discernible. Courts swore truth by Ma'at. Petitions moved up the ladder with a mixture of form and feeling. Surveyors used measuring cords and geometry to restore boundaries erased by kind water. Play, sound, and nature. The game of Senate rehearsed a soul's journey, pieces moved by luck and learning. Mayhen, the serpent game, coiled a world you could finish with patience and good company. The sistrum and menat kept time for dancing and prayer. Metal tongues rang like warm rain. Harps and lutes folded rivers into rooms. Songs ferried sorrow to the far bank. In marshes, fishers and fowlers threw curved sticks that returned like jokes. Sport and supper met. Cats were guardians of thresholds. At a cat's death, families shaved eyebrows to show their grief. Ibis and baboon belonged to Thoth, crocodiles to Sobek. Animals were not symbols only. They were neighbors. Incense blends like Kefi-stitched wine, honey, and resin into smoke that could teach a room to exhale. Colors spoke. Green meant rebirth. Black meant fertile soil. Gold meant imperishable sunlight. Temples and pyramids faced the cardinal points. Architecture was a compass as well as a shelter. Viewed together, these are not trivia. They are an operating system. In a world where the flood can forget, you teach yourself to remember. Names, measures, hymns, the angle of a headrest, the way to tie a knot that refuses to slip. In a climate that invites sickness of eye and skin, you make beauty serve health, and health serve beauty, so neither needs to apologize for the other. In a cosmos where the sun dies nightly and is reborn, you learn to treat every ending as a rehearsal for morning. And the pyramids? They stand as the largest sentence this culture ever wrote about continuity. But if you tilt your head, you see that the same sentence was also scratched into a potsherd, whispered at a door lintel, braided into a wig, tapped onto a drumhead at dusk. The big stone said, "One name will not be lost." The small gestures said, "Nor will yours." Between them stretched Ma'at, a feather laid on the scale and found, on most days, to be enough. So let us end this long look the Egyptian way, by returning to the personal. Hepu sets down his reed and warms his hands over the last shimmer of the brazier. He thinks about the day a pyramid builder learned to move together with 9 others, feet and breath aligned, and how that skill came home as tenderness when lifting a sleeping child. He thinks about the time he wrote fault jar instead of fault boy, and how that small truth rippled out into a kinder street. He thinks about Miu's grave under the fig tree and the way love trained his house to show grief without shame. He knows, because his elders have told him and his bones have confirmed it, that the heart will speak in a quiet hall one day, and that the best way to help it is to practice speaking gently now. We still practice. Our tools are brighter. Our ledgers glow. But we still ask the river to teach us its patience. We still place a small protection at our thresholds, even if it is only a light we leave on for someone who is late. We still bake bread and pour drinks and offer them to those we miss, even if the altar is a table with 2 chairs. We still write our names in each other's, hoping the saying will keep them safe. And we still build pyramids of time, of care, of shared attention, because we believe, as they did, that a life can be weighed and found light if it has loved the world it was given. Night folds itself along the edges of the village, and the streets become the quiet lines between sleeping rooms. Hipu sits awake on the threshold, elbows on his knees, the wooden headrest at his side like a crescent boat waiting for tide. The fig leaves stroke the air. Somewhere, a jar clicks as it cools. Far off, a priest taps a drum once, and the sound travels like a pebble, skipping 4 times before it sinks. He is tired, but the day will not release him yet. He thinks of the coffin lid he painted, of the eyes that will greet the dawn inside the stone corridor, of his mother's hands smoothing the linen over Miu's small body. A feather is caught in a crack of the threshold, a gull's gift from the river, white, light, a sliver of moon made of down. He picks it up, and the world changes softly, as if someone turned the flame of the lamp down until it became a star, and then a seed. The door is a doorway in a larger sense now. He steps through and into a hall that has waited for him since before he knew what waiting was. Columns rise like calm trees. The ceiling is the night itself turned inside and painted with its own stars. The air is so still, it seems to listen. At the far end, a scale stands in a pool of gentled light, one pan holding nothing visible, the other holding nothing visible, both already heavy with promise. Anubis's jackal profile is a dark edge against brightness, attentive without menace. Thoth, with ibis head and eyes like inkwells, holds a writing palette and a reed that looks like it could sign a sky. Along the walls sit the 42, who ask the 42 questions, the kind that sound simple and decide everything. Hepu knows where he is. He has written these scenes in margins, drawn the feather dozens of times, told a child what Ma'at means with the help of a string and a stick. It's one thing to copy a myth into the day, another to walk into it carrying your chest like an amphora that might crack. Step forward, the quiet suggests, though no one moves a mouth. Hepu's bare feet remember cool stone. He feels the weight of his body the way a man feels the weight of an honest jar, neither ashamed nor proud, only aware. He glances down and sees his heart in his hands, as if it had been waiting there all along. It is not a cartoon of muscle. It is the thing that counted Mu's ribs, that wrote, fault, jar, that paused over Hetepti's line on the ledger, that kept time with the drum at funerals and with his mother's breath when her sleep grew thin. It is warm. It has heft. It is him. Hapu thinks of the small times he turned away. The day the boy with the cracked jar was blamed, and he almost let the lie settle like dust. The time he wrote a number too quickly and made a man's week smaller. The afternoon he did not walk to the widow's door when he could have. He thinks, too, of the times he chose otherwise. The petition he folded like a bird and carried. The ink he used, red and careful, for kindness. The name he copied for a laborer who wanted to watch his own syllables fly for once. The heart warms in his hands, remembering both. Will it be heavier than a feather? The question arrives like a tide, no louder than a breath. He has asked it in other lives, at other thresholds, before sleep, and before speaking to someone he loved less well than he wished. Tonight, the question has a room to stand up in. Anubis tips his head as if scenting weather. Thoth's reed hovers, waiting to become a line. Hapu steps to the scale. He lays his heart on the left pan. It rests with the soft sound a loaf makes when set down. On the right, Ma'at's feather lies as if it had always been there, light made into shape. The beam trembles. The room holds its breath. You can hear a grain of incense falling in some distant chapel and landing like snow. For a moment, the left dips, a fractional hush. Hapu feels regret gather at the edges of his ribs like small stones. He thinks of the child he scolded when patience would have taught better, and of the time he took an extra ladle of beer because the day was long. The beam remembers these things without scorn, and the pan settles a degree lower. He can almost see Amit, a crocodile lion hippo, shift its weight at the hall's edge, not threatening, not eager, only present, as real as the river is real, even when you're inside. Breathe, a voice says, very close, very familiar. He does. With the exhale, memories arrive that weigh differently. Mirette's fingers tying a bead to a cat's collar, the way Satra laughed when her coal line came out right on the second try. Nebet's small request to paint the eyes clear for his mother who liked boats. Hetepti's palm pressing the faience bead into his hand with a look that said, I see you seeing me. These are not excuses. They are weights of another kind. Weights that lighten. The beam answers to both kinds of memory. It quivers. Thoth's reed does not yet touch the palate. Anubis watches with a stillness that has nothing to do with cold and everything to do with care. The 42 do not speak, but their questions cross the room like swallows hunting at dusk. Not to wound, but to clear the air. Did you withhold food? Did you steal sleep? Did you make a road harder? Hapu's throat tightens. Sometimes, his bones say. Not when I remembered who I was. His breath says. Less as I learned. His hands say. There is no trick here, no loophole, no lawyerly thread to pull. There is your heart. And there is a feather that is less a thing than a standard. And there is the relief of not being asked to be perfect, only balanced. Something else enters the hall that none of the gods carried. The memory of a cat's purr, like a small drum under a palm. Mayu, quick tail, green eyes, ordinary holiness, walks into his mind and sits beside the scale, curling her tail around her paws. The ridiculousness of this in view of protocol cracks the seriousness just enough to let tenderness breathe. Amit blinks, bored or soothed, and rests its massive head on its paws. If a monster can nap where judgment is waiting, perhaps judgment is not designed to terrify. Anubis lays a finger on the beam. He does not push. He steadies. The feather lifts and settles, lifts and settles, like a breath learning a rhythm. The heart rests. The tilting stops. The crossbar levels. Not perfectly pinned, but calm enough that you could lay a cup of honey on it and not spill a drop. Thoth sets his reed down at last and writes with a hand that has written for longer than stone. Balanced. The word is not a bell. It is a door that opens without creak. The 42 relax like reeds remembering wind. Amit sighs and rolls to one side like a dog who has decided your picnic is not worth guarding. Somewhere in the high dark, a single star flares and then chooses the comfort of steadiness instead. Hapu waits for triumph, for a trumpet of relief. What arrives is something kinder. Rightness. The feeling you get when a jug sits true on a flat surface, when a line of text is straight, when a carpenter's joints meet without daylight between them. He had thought judgment would be like a cliff. It is like a plumb line and a hand that knows how to use it. Go on, says the quiet that has become a friend. A doorway appears where there had been wall. Through it lies a brightness that is not the sun, and yet feels like noon after weeks of rain. Hapu steps. The light does not blind. It washes. He is in a field that looks like every field he has ever helped irrigate, and none of them. Reeds bowing in a wind no one else can hear. Water bright as hammered copper. Paths that know your feet the way a headrest knows the curve of your neck. In the distance, figures work and sing, but their labor is a game you would fight for a turn at. A bark glides by without crew. The oars keep their own time. On a bank sits a woman with eyes that have watched many dawns. Hapu knows her without introductions. The carpenter's mother, now younger than her son, or perhaps older than any story cares to measure. She is precisely herself, which is the most beautiful form. Near her, a cat naps with one ear cocked. The ear twitches when Hapu's shadow reaches it. The woman gestures to the water. Clear enough? She asks, the way Nebet did when he requested the painted eyes for her coffin lid. Hapu kneels and sees the riverbed through the ripples, the little stones, the stripe of mud, the curve of a shell. Clear, he says, and the word is everything he hoped, nothing more than it needs to be. Time, which had been holding politely outside, touches his shoulder and reminds him of another room, smelling of lamp oil and bread and sleep. The hall folds itself back into the dark it came from. The scale becomes a memory of balance you can carry in your pocket. Thoth's ink dries. A line finished, a day saved. Anubis turns, and the edge of him is the edge of dawn. Hapu steps back through the door that is both an entrance and an exit, both a beginning and the same. He wakes on the threshold with the feather still in his hand. It is just a feather again, soft and absurd and perfect. The world has shifted by a degree you can only measure from inside your chest. The village is quiet as the inside of a shell. A dozing dog huffs in its sleep. Someone's lamp takes a tiny breath and releases it. In the days that follow, nothing dramatic happens, which is how you know the world is working. Hapu writes Hetepti's petition in careful red for the line that needs weight. He copies a hymn for the temple, his hand slower now in the best way, lingering where the words hold someone's day together. Bread, beer, life, stability, health. He corrects a number in a storehouse list and says aloud to the younger scribe who watches him, "The beam tilts. We adjust." The boy nods, not understanding and understanding entirely. The tomb accepts Nabet's mother. The corridor is cool. The air is clean with resin and the small, honest smell of wood. The eyes. Hepu painted face toward a sun they will never see and somehow see anyway. The family speaks her name, and the name breathes. Outside, someone spills a little beer on the ground on purpose. A libation like a thank you note to what you cannot mail. They walk home with empty hands and full hearts and discover that these can be the same thing. At night, the roof is a raft under the sky. The headrest finds Hepu's neck. He thinks of all the ways Egyptians have practiced continuation, a game that maps a soul's journey so a child can learn it by laughing, a jar kept for a heart that will never be kept there, a painted eye that watches a room where the living still bring bread, a little stone scarab begging the heart to be kind, not silent. Continuity is not a desperate clutch. It is a careful handoff. You live as if you will be weighed, and you love as if the feather is someone else's comfort. He places the feather from the threshold on the shelf beside the jed pillar and the wajet eye. It looks at home immediately, as if it had been told to wait there. Satra loops Hetepti's bead onto her string of charms. It flashes river cool when she moves. Merit sets a small cup by Muse stone and calls it silly while refilling it every morning anyway. The house learns that grief and gratitude drink from the same jar. When Hepu walks to the river at dawn, the Nile greets him with its old, patient shoulder. He cups water and lifts it to his mouth. It tastes like silt and sun and little else. Across the bank, a boy lowers a shadaf and raises it, a rhythm taught by bodies to other bodies for so long that it might as well be written into bone. A barge moves with the confidence of something that knows its way. In the reeds, an ibis writes the morning with its bill and then folds the pen away. The fear that had sat like an uninvited guest at the back of Hepu's mind. Will my life be judged and found too heavy? Does not leave entirely. It becomes instead a companion with good manners, the kind who straightens the mat at the doorway and reminds you to check your pockets for pebbles before you step onto the scale. He learns to feel the difference between the stones that belong there. Responsibility, story, attention, and the gravel he picked up without noticing. Stubbornness, hurry, small cruelties that like to ride along. He empties his pockets more often. The beam, in his imagination, thanks him. In this land, even endings are taught to behave like beginnings. The sun rehearses it daily. Seeds remember it without instruction. Families keep company with it around firelight, telling stories that braid grief with bread so that neither is hard to swallow. The village measures itself not only by harvests and head counts, but by the lightness with which its children sleep. A civilization this old learned long ago that peace is not the absence of judgment, but the presence of balance. You do what you can. You repair what you can. You forgive what you must. And you set your head on the curved wood, trusting that neck and world both know how to rest. Close your eyes again then. Listen for the drum that doesn't hurry. Feel the beam find level and hold. The feather settles. The heart breathes. The cat turns once in memory and sleeps. The river moves without noise, which is another way of saying it is speaking in a language you already know. In, out, warmth, cool, light, shadow, name spoken, name kept. The hall of Ma'at is far away and very near. The threshold is your own. The night takes you the way a mother takes a weight from a child. Gently, glad to help. I have told you a long story, but its lesson is quiet. The past teaches us this. Even the greatest civilizations knew that true eternity lives in silence and in peace. Not in the cry of trumpets, not in the cut of stone only, not in the names shouted from full mouths, but in the soft continuities that require no witness. A lamp trimmed, a loaf shared, a name spoken softly before sleep, a heart that has practiced balance all day so that at night it can finally rest. Listen to the way that thought settles. It does not argue. It arrives. In Egypt, they called that arriving ma'at, rightness, balance, the feeling of a beam that has learned where level is and prefers to stay there. You have felt it before. When a picture frame stops itching your eye because it's finally straight. When a drawer closes without sticking. When your own breath finds you and says, "Here, just this much, no more is needed." That is where the long road of ritual ends. Not in spectacle, but in the little still place where the world and the body agree. We too know our way to that place. Tonight, you have your own rituals, gentle and modern and human. You dim a lamp. You fold back a blanket so it will be easy to lift. You plump a pillow, linen or cotton instead of carved wood. But the intention is the same, to cradle the neck, to ask the day to release its hold. Maybe you silence a device, set a glass of water within reach, check the latch on a door. Small protections, small promises. In another language, in another house, under a ceiling of painted stars were the real ones. People did the same. They washed the dust from their feet. They set a cone of perfume to melt through dreaming. They laid a hand on a doorway god and asked for ordinary mercy. Different objects, the same human sentence. Let me be safe enough to sleep. You carry through your rooms what Hepu carried through his. Attention. Attention is the truest amulet. It makes bread sacred and ledgers honest. It steadies a brush and a heart's beam. It turns an animal's purr into a bell that rings peace. When you close your eyes, you are not closing them to the world. You are opening them inward to the part of you that has watched rivers for a long time and knows their language. That part is old. It remembers reeds and stars and the time before clocks. It has work for you, but the first task is always the same. Soften, settle, allow. Breathe, then, slowly, as if the air were a cool river and you are kneeling on a familiar bank. Inhale, as if you are drawing a line of coal. Steady, sure, protecting the tender light of the eye. Exhale, as if you are smoothing a strip of linen, long, unhurried, ready to wrap what needs keeping. Inhale, count to 4, the way a priest might count drops in a water clock. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for a quiet moment, a 5th day between days, a birthday for rest. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Feel your jaw release. The tongue loosens from the roof of the mouth. The throat widens as a temple door at dawn. Shoulders lower, as if a weight has remembered it prefers the ground. The back lengthens, a jed pillar in living wood. The hands that did so much, grow warm and still. Let the room take shape around you in the gentlest way. The lamp becomes a small moon. The blanket becomes a field where wind has laid the grain in soft directions. Your bed learns to be a bark, a little boat that knows the channel by heart. The night is the Nile moving almost without sound. You are floating, but not away. Within the great, kind current that carried fishermen and kings and scribes and cats and widows, and that also carries the leaf, the cradle song, the last good sentence of the day. Think of our 50 small facts, not as a list now, but as a constellation. Each one a star, each one lighting a tiny point on the map of hidden culture. If you look without strain, you can see them connect. A wooden headrest aligned with vertebrae becomes a modern pillow, remembering your neck's curve. A perfume cone melting into hair becomes the slow fading of lavender in your room. Bread and beer as wages becomes the glass of water at your bedside and the snack you promised your morning. A heart weighed against a feather becomes the quiet inventory you take before sleep. Did I carry too many stones today? Painted eyes on a coffin become the way your window, half open, keeps you aware of the first blue of dawn. Nothing to fix, nothing to prove. Only this noticing, which is a soft kind of prayer. History does not end. It breathes out and back in. The pyramids, too, rest at night. Even their shadows sleep. Temples are locked and then unlocked again. Priests whisper and then fall silent. Cats curl, tails around noses, and dream, perhaps of boats, perhaps of warm roofs, perhaps only of being cats. People like Hapu set their reeds down and let the ink dry. They did this for 3,000 years, which is another way of saying they practiced being human, and it worked. If immortality exists anywhere we can reach, it is here, in this practice, in the way gestures repeat, not by command, but by relief. Yes, this helps. You straighten a coverlet, and someone 5,000 years ago straightened a shroud. You take a sip of water, and a boatman did the same, tasting the same old molecules. You say a name under your breath, and a carpenter's son in a courtyard full of resin smoke once did too. The soul, if it has weight, is measured by such kindnesses. If it has wings, they are made of such small, strong feathers. Let the images slow now, like oars easing to a stop. A river at night, black as polished basalt, carrying a ribbon of starlight. A field of reeds whispering, each stalk a voice that does not need to be louder than the one beside it. A drum tapped once from very far away to tell the dark that all is well. A painted eye on wood that watches nothing and watches everything. A scale finding level and then forgetting to move. A cat's purr tunneling gently through the last wakefulness of your hand. A sistrum shimmer fading into the quiet ring in the air that remains after a bell has finished being a bell. If thoughts come, and they will, imagine setting each one on a boat and pushing it from the bank. Watch it glide into the broad water and become part of the slow, useful current. Worries are only passengers. The river knows its path. It will not let them build a city on your shore tonight. Feel the places your body meets the bed. Back of head, shoulders, ribs, hips, calves, heels. Each contact is an offering. Each offering is accepted. The mattress receives you the way cool stone receives palm, without agenda. You are not being held down. You are being held up. It is all right if you do not sleep yet. Drowsiness is a visitor with perfect timing. It comes when there is nothing left to do. Consider how the Egyptians arranged even their silence. They left room at the end of lines for the god's name. They left 5 days at the end of months for the god's birthdays. Leave a little room now at the end of your day for whatever you call holy, quiet, breath, the memory of a hand you loved, the peace of being exactly where you are. If you want a blessing, and many people do, I can offer you one in a language older than electricity and as simple as a mother's hum. May your heart be light tonight, as light as the feather that knows the truth. May your house be steady, like a jed pillar in a kind earth. May your breath move easily, like a bark on a gentle reach of river. May your name be spoken tomorrow with affection and kept tonight in safety. May Bastet sit on your windowsill and guard the seams of your sleep. May Isis wrap the linen of the dark around your shoulders and make it warm. May Osiris, who knows the path through endings, keep watch so you do not have to. May Ma'at, patient and exact, balance what can be balanced and let the rest drift away. There is nothing further to learn this evening. The story has closed like a scroll rolled softly between two careful hands. If you unroll it tomorrow, it will still be there. For now, let the ink dry. Let the lamp remember its own way to go out. Let the room become a small temple to rest, fragrant with whatever your life has chosen as its kifi. Clean sheets, cool air, a sound no louder than a cat's dream. Inhale, smooth and quiet. Exhale, long and warm. Again, in and out. The Nile moves. The stars keep their patient appointments. Somewhere, reeds tap a boat, and the boat answers by barely noticing. Somewhere, a scribe sets down his reed and smiles for no one. Somewhere, a child counts pomegranate seeds and stops when sleep takes her hand. Here, tonight, you join them. Not by traveling, but by allowing the river of time to carry you the short, sweet distance to where your body already longs to be. Close your eyes. The past is not behind you. It is around you, kind and unafraid. The night spreads its linen. The feather rests. The scale is still. The story is quiet. You are safe. You are seen. You are already halfway to morning. Let the last pictures settle like soft sand in a clear bowl. Water, gentle Nile water, moving without hurry. Warm sand, holding your weight and then releasing it. Stars, a quiet shawl stretched over the pyramids. Inhale, as if the river were filling you with cool light. Exhale, as if the river were flowing back to the sea, taking the day with it. Feel your forehead smooth, like stone polished by 1,000 kind hands. Feel your eyes become two calm pools beneath the line of coal. Cool, unbothered, still. Let your jaw loosen, your tongue resting like a small boat on a quiet shore. Shoulders soften. The D-jet of your spine stands steady without effort. Arms heavy, hands warm, fingers uncurled. Hips easy, legs lengthening, calves quiet, feet open to the blanket's touch. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold a small God day between breaths. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Listen for the river again. It speaks in hushes. Shh, against a reed. Shh, against a stair of stone. Far away, sand remembers the day's heat and gives back only what is kind. Above it all, the sky is a broad, dark bowl, and on its inner face the constellations shine like gold leaf. Fixed, patient, friendly. Inhale, Nile. Exhale, night. Let your thoughts be little boats. Place each one on the water and give it a gentle push. They drift. They widen their distance. They become dots. They become nothing. You remain on the warm bank, safe, watched over, unneeded by the boats you have let go. Picture the pyramids in starlight. Big shapes turned into silhouettes, edges softened by distance. Between them, the wind moves like a low lullaby, and the sand replies in a whisper you don't need to translate. Your body hears it anyway. Your ribs rock like a bark at anchor, just enough to feel the water, not enough to think about it. Inhale, cool. Exhale, warm. If a sound arrives, from the room, from the street, from the memory, let it pass through you like smoke from Kaifi incense, sweet, thin, harmless. If a thought returns, greet it. Place it on a reed boat and watch it recede along the silver path the moon lays on the river. Now count with me, each number a step down a soft stair into sleep. 10. The Nile wide and quiet. 9. Sand warm beneath the arches of your feet. 8. The lamp becomes a single tame star. 7. The air smells faintly of resin and bread. 6. The painted eye closes, not to ignore, but to rest. 5. The feather of Ma'at waits, light and certain. 4. Your heart settles, even lighter. 3. Breath and river are the same rhythm. 2. The sky leans closer, protective and kind. 1. You enter the cool chamber of rest. Inhale. Exhale. If you need words to hold in your palm, let these be enough. You are safe on the river's edge. You are warm on the friendly sand. You are small beneath a generous sky. You are welcomed by the night. May your dreams be ferry boats, simple and sure. May your body remember the way to morning without your help. May your mind set down its basket and finally walk with empty hands. Inhale, ease. Exhale, release. And now the blessing, sleep peacefully. May your sleep be as light as Ma'at's feather, true, balanced, effortless. May the warm sand cradle you, the Nile hush you, and the stars keep quiet watch over your door. May the ancient gods, keepers of hearth and threshold, river and sky, guard your night. May you be seen. May you be kept. May you wake at dawn the way the sun wakes on the water. Slowly, gently, welcomed by light. Inhale. Exhale. Drift.